Mine have all tended to be
Okay. Good evening, and on behalf of Scotland Against Criminalising Communities, I'd like to welcome you to this Hustings meeting for the Scottish Parliamentary elections. Now, this evening means that I'm going to speak very little and give you an opportunity to ask lots of questions. But please note that this event is being live streamed. Now, I'll kick off by introducing the panel. Now, it's quite a long, big panel, so I'll start on my left. Alison Dickey from the SNP. She's a constituency candidate for Edinburgh Central. Alex Stewart-Clark from the Conservatives. He's also a constituency candidate for Mid-Fife and Glenrothes. Kevin Gore from Solidarity. We've got Kate MacDonald from the Women's Equality Party, and she's kindly stepping in for Lee Chalmers. Lorna Slater from the Green Party, and then there's Colin Fox from Rise, Kat Headley from Labour, and Jackie Bell from the Lib Dems. Okay, the way we're going to do it is we're going to kick off with, they're going to be given an opportunity to make a 3-minute opening statement, and then we'll open it up for questions from the floor. So I know politicians have a problem with 3 minutes, but I will be ruthless, so please, I apologise in advance. So,
petition currently in the Parliament, in the new Parliament it's going to be considered, but at the moment it's like in Scotland, it's like any organisation, schools can choose for them to be part of the Curriculum for Excellence, to invite them in to do things. That's where it stands at the moment. So I hope that gives you a snapshot of where we're at with those different policies, and I know we'll speak more about it later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Alex Stewart-Clark from the Conservatives.
Hello, my name is Alex Stewart-Clark. About 6 months ago, I didn't have any grey hair, but venturing into politics, it gave me a bit of grey hair, probably with Conservative policies and my trying to learn about it. So we're asked to talk about the 7 points that SACC has put forward. The first one is Prevent Bill. The Prevent Bill was a reaction to the terrorist situation which we have in our country. Now, the UK has probably one of the best anti-terrorist organisations at GCHQ, and would be very good at where we stigmatise and cause an increase in sectarianism. The Scottish Justice Bill brought 42 out of the 50 that were sentenced for sectarian violence, which is good. I think the UK government needs room for improvement there. In terms of refugees, we have a defined asylum system we need to have a defined asylum system with cross-party agreement. Refugees need proper housing with respect and fairness. I think the private sector and the government sector have failed in terms of housing them. I think the third sector, the charity sector, is a good organisation to look at to partner with them. In terms of military recruitment of schools, I do agree with it. I joined up at school and it benefited me. And if these guys are giving us jobs, if they're keeping kids off the streets, great, go for it. Stop and search, yes to effective controls. Police have to do their job, and the police often get it in the net for getting it slightly wrong. I think they uphold the law and order. They are often criticised for it. I think the police have suffered in Scotland because of centralisation. SNP have centralised it, which caused a lot of demoralised police. 80% of the police force are demoralised. I think we've got situations of police which are armed and with taser guns. That's probably major exaggeration there. I think, if policemen are putting their lives on the line for us, to protect our lives, then and there is a bomb alert, then they are entitled to carry guns. They are entitled to carry taser guns. It's for our own safety.
I'm sorry, I have to stop you there. You've gone well over your 3 minutes. So.
And then just to finish, mass surveillance, I agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Kevin Gore from Solidarity.
Thanks very much, Peter. Just like my colleague, I'd like to go also through the main points that Scotland Against Criminalising Communities is putting forward. And first of all, in terms of prevent, I think there needs to be an honest discussion within Scotland, within our government, to look at what causes so-called terrorism. And I believe that if you continue to oppress people by occupation, by invasion, by apartheid, by stripping their country of their wealth in order to gain financial gain for your own country, I think that eventually people will rise. And we know that through history. Was Malcolm X a terrorist when he went against racism in his country? Was our very own James Connolly from the Cowgate and Edinburgh Sun and the Cowgate, when he sparked the rising in 1916, which eventually overthrew the British government in Ireland, was he a terrorist? Was Geronimo, for taking his people out of the prison camps, his reservations, was he a terrorist? These are all things through history that we'll have to look at. Was the great and the brilliant Nelson Mandela for standing against apartheid, was he a terrorist? Even though Margaret Thatcher said he was. And even though the right-wing media, when he passed away, also said he was. These discussions have to be made. And I think us, as a country, should be talking about what are we doing as a nation to fuel the fire to make people act in this way. In terms of helping refugees, of course we have to help to welcome refugees. Sometimes we're the cause of people coming to our country because of some of the things that I've mentioned. And in my capacity as a community worker for the last 25 years, working in the southwest Edinburgh, I actually gained a lot of experience of working with families and individuals who were basically dropped in Wester Hales in 1992 after fleeing from the Bosnian conflict. I remember one older gentleman, he didn't even know what country he was in. He was lifted by helicopter out from a war zone in Bosnia. His family were left behind. He was put in a refugee camp in Bosnia, then North Berwick, and then put out into Wester Hales. The guy was totally isolated, along with other families. And of course, as Saka's saying, we need to spend money on refugees. These people, they couldn't speak English. We had to get their children into school. We had to look at getting counselling for them because of the trauma that they had experienced during obviously the horrendous things that went on during the Bosnian conflict. And obviously there's a lot of money to work with partners throughout the communities to make sure that refugees are given an adequate support in our communities.
Can I ask you to wrap up, please?
Yeah, sure. The rest of the things, of course, they're very much in support of as well in terms of SAC. In terms of recruiting around schools with the British Army, when you go through times like this, I remember going through times where I grew up in a working class estate. I grew up in a mining community when Thatcher shut all the mines down, and it was either you had to source work in other places throughout Britain, or you joined the army, or you took to drugs. That was the reason you joined the army. And that goes on now. If you go around the house in the States, you'll see all the army going around the different areas of deprivation, and they're going into schools. And of course young people will join the army in order to get escapism. Right. And we don't agree with that. We think that there should be other opportunities for young people.
Okay, Kevin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, next is Kate from the Women's Equality Party.
Hi, my name is Kate MacDonald and I'm here representing the Scottish Women's Equality Party. To tell you a little bit about who we are a brand new force in Scottish politics, a non-partisan political party focused on the goal of gender equality. Our goal is pretty simple. It's to make Scotland the first truly equal country in the world, and our manifesto sets out real concrete plans to make that happen. We want to end violence against women, finally achieve equal pay, and to put in place a system whereby men and women stand on equal footing in the fields of politics, business, education and family life. Now, we're focusing on the 52% of Scotland's population that have never experienced equality, but we can't do that without acknowledging that the issue goes far deeper than just gender. Inequality suffered as a result of race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity and disability, and we have to acknowledge that, as well as acknowledging that for some of us, we're caught in a Venn diagram of intersecting inequalities that leave us firmly at the bottom of a really destructive social hierarchy. Women's rights are human rights, and so it's probably unsurprising that we share a lot of the manifesto commitments of the SACC. We believe that schools and universities are places of education where we should learn respect and tolerance for our fellow citizens, not places of surveillance and suspicion, and certainly not places of military recruitment. We also believe, as a party, that refugees, as some of the most vulnerable in our society, should be welcomed here and should be given the opportunity to create a better life for themselves, free from the war that they've been fleeing. We also are well aware of the damaging impact of stereotypes. It's a huge part of our manifesto, and so we believe that racist stop and search policies and the prevent strategy that reinforce discriminatory, anti-democratic ideas about religious and political groups are unacceptable. And finally, we strongly and unequivocally oppose any repeal to the Human Rights Act, and a piece of legislation that is hugely influential and important, not only in securing a fair and equal Scotland, but in securing a fair and equal world. The fact that some of us are still struggling to have our basic human rights acknowledged is a damning indictment of our society, and it's time, I think, for a new kind of politics in Scotland. The Women's Equality Party are here to make sure that all of us get the chance to be a part of that, and to make sure that at Holyrood, creating a fair and equal Scotland is always on the agenda.
Thank you. Right, before we move on to other speakers, remember after this you'll be able to ask questions, so feel free to think about what you want to ask. Next is Lorna Slater from the Green Party.
Hi there, I'm Lorna Slater. I'm number 3 on the Lothian list after Alison Johnson, who's been a Green MSP for the last 5 years, and Andy Whiteman, the well-known land reform campaigner. The Scottish Greens can unequivocally say we support all of these aims. In fact, we have a track record. So we had 2 of these items I mentioned explicitly in our manifesto: yes to refugees and yes to the Human Rights Act. Our co-convener Maggie Chapman has been campaigning about no military recruitment in schools for 8 years. And our MSPs voted against the Offensive Behaviour in Football Act. So we have a track record on these specific policies. In terms of the overall view, we have called out the Race Equality Framework Scotland Act in our manifesto as something that we absolutely support. And in terms of ways of implementing this, diversity in representation of politics, in the police, in teaching in all aspects of society is the way that we would go about that. I have in front of me here some questions which are part of the PREVENT programme. They help you decide whether you're going to be a terrorist or not. Have you ever felt a desire for political or moral change? Have you ever disagreed with UK foreign policy? Have you ever questioned Western media reporting? Well, that's most of the Green Party then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Colin Fox from Rise.
Thank you very much, Zahid. Can I let the audience into a secret? Zahid told us at the beginning of the meeting that the order of the speakers would be random. And you see he's going right along the table. So,
Random for me.
Random for you, right? But the seating arrangements was random. I'm delighted to be here, Zahid. I'm representing Rise, Scotland's Left Alliance, which is the most important left unity project in Scotland in a generation. And we're standing in all lists in Scotland, all 8 of them. And we want your second vote for an independent socialist Scotland and a modern democratic republic. And I think it's inevitable in this Hustings that we touch on the overwhelming mood of the electorate in Scotland before I deal with the 7 questions. And for none of us, Zahid, you can be assured in 3 minutes I'm not going to address all 7, I'll address 2. But I wanted to put in context that the overwhelming mood of the electorate in Scotland in this election is anti-Tory. Millions of people are suffering poverty pay, insecure employment and crippling debts. They feel isolated and exploited, and they hold the Tories responsible for that, and they're desperate to be shot of them. That's the Scottish Parliament elections of 2016. The SNP are, for the moment, the main beneficiaries of this mood. But I have to say the illusions in the SNP are quite frankly enormous and sometimes ridiculous. Rise offers a socialist alternative because Scotland's a wealthy country whose riches are hoarded by powerful interests who insist that the majority of us cannot have the bare necessities of life, and Rise intends to change all that. We're in favour of a second referendum on independence in the lifetime of this Parliament. We're in favour of a £10 an hour living wage to end the scourge of poverty wages. We're in favour of scrapping the unfair council tax and replacing it with an income-based alternative. We want to build 100,000 affordable houses, 100,000 new green jobs for young generations of Scots in the future industries, and we want to eradicate fuel poverty in Scotland. And if I could pick just two of the questions that have been put in front of the speakers tonight. The British government's so-called war on terrorism programme to prevent radicalisation of young Muslims is fundamentally flawed and alienating the very people that they seek to persuade and to reach. And, you know, Karl Marx wrote about the dialectical contradiction of this particular phenomenon 150 years ago, when it turns out today that the ISIL's biggest recruiting asset is the British government. And they wonder why young Muslims, in fact young people, in fact young and old people across the length and breadth of Britain, are sickened and disgusted by Britain's conduct in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, and in supporting despotic regimes throughout the Middle East. Quite frankly, I congratulate all those young people, young Muslims in Britain, who are angry and who've been radicalised into a position that they want to stand up and speak out against such behaviour allegedly conducted in their name. And on the issue of refugees and immigrants, Rise makes it absolutely clear: refugees who come to this country and immigrants who come to this country make it a better place by coming here. Immigrants and refugees have been coming to Scotland for centuries, and I won't stand idly by and see them scapegoated for an economic and financial crisis that was caused by the bankers, because that's the modus operandi of this government. And I have to say, set in slightly different tone from the previous speakers, I'm ashamed often of the so-called welcome that we give to refugees and immigrants to this country. We give them the worst housing, we give them the worst jobs, they suffer the worst rates of pay, and sometimes they're subject to racist abuse that we should be ashamed of as a nation. I don't want to see that continue, and I'm proud of the fact that as a son, grandson of an immigrant who came to this country, many of us share that background, and I want to offer in the new Scotland a welcome to immigrants and refugees coming here. I want to ensure they get a better welcome in future than they get currently, and I congratulate organisations like Scotland Against Criminalising Communities for the role they play in that work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next is Jackie Bell from the Lib Dems.
Are we doing it randomly now?
Well,
Yes,
I just thought I'd wake you up.
Let's make sure we're paying attention.
Yes. You can go ahead if you want.
Well, I'm not Jackie Bell from the Lib Dems. I'm Kat Headley from the Labour Party. And I'm really pleased to be here this evening, and I hope you'll all have a good evening. We'll try and get quickly to the point so we can hear your questions. I'm the granddaughter of an immigrant who came from Guyana, which at the time was a British colony, and he came here as part of the armed forces, became a teacher and went to Orkney with his mixed race family, and unfortunately the experience for him as an immigrant in this country was not wholly positive, and it certainly wasn't for my father and his brothers and sisters either. But I think we have come a long way from there, and I think that but there are still lots to be done. In relation to human rights, I'm a solicitor in my day job, and human rights are one of the things that I studied and have a great amount of love for in terms of what the Labour Party did in terms of bringing in the Human Rights Act, and we need to defend it. And I think that in Scotland we sometimes assume that everyone is for the Human Rights Act and that it's safe from the political establishment, but it's not. One of the things that got me most involved in politics and really made me prick up my ears was immediately after the last election was the attack from Alex Salmond and Kenny McCaskill against the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom and human rights lawyers in Scotland, when they said that we need to have people who were suspects were entitled to legal representation at the point of interview. They described it, whoever pays the piper pays the tune, and that is the kind of attitude that unfortunately has been prevalent in relation to justice with the SNP in this Parliament. In going to the issues that you've talked about in your agenda, I think that prevent as a strategy was initially the Labour government policy following the 2005 bombings. But what has happened in relation to implementation under the Conservative Party has led it far from where I think it needs to be, and what we have seen is in relation to that you are actually alienating those people that we are trying to engage with to prevent the horrors of terrorism and radicalisation in this country. Andy Burnham earlier this month said that we need to have a complete rethink of the whole approach in relation to tackling radicalisation, and I would completely agree with this. In relation to refugees, as a granddaughter and an immigrant, I think that we need to do more to welcome everyone that comes to this country, particularly those people who come in times of desperate need and from horrific backgrounds. Scottish Labour, if elected to the government, would introduce a refugee integration bill in order to address a lot of the issues that refugees face in this country when they're coming here in relation to integration, language, interpretation and housing. In relation to military recruitment in schools, I think that the strengthening scrutiny, I think from a personal point of view, I think is important, because I think that we need to not, as one of the earlier speakers say, make this feel that this is the only opportunity that children from deprived backgrounds might have in order to escape their communities. But equally, we need to recognise that there are people who do want to follow a career in the armed services, and there needs to be a balance in relation to the two. In relation to the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act, this is a terrible, illiberal, stigmatising act that the Scottish Labour Party would get rid of. The Human Rights Act, as I've already said, I'm absolutely for. And mass surveillance, we need to, the Scottish Parliament needs to look at how we work and how we implement the issues with surveillance, because we need to have the balance, but it has to respect privacy, it has to respect human rights, and it has to respect democracy. So I'm really looking forward to the questions that you've got, either in relation to these specific issues or more broadly, and thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you very much, Kat Headley from the Labour Party. Okay, finally, Jackie Bell from the Lib Dems.
Yes, I really am Jackie Bell. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to address you tonight. Although Scottish Liberal Democrats have only had 5 MSPs in the last Holyrood Parliament, they have been punching above their weight on a whole range of issues, including civil liberties. Civil liberties and human rights are a major theme of our 2016 manifesto. As well as our MSPs, our MPs, peers and wider membership have also been doing much work on the areas that the SACC manifesto highlights. Some of those are reserved matters. As an introduction, and briefly, I can only just touch on some of the themes, and I hope I can expand later on in the evening. The Prevent strategy is a reserved matter, and it's part of the UK government counter-terrorist strategy. Actions include stopping apologists for terrorism travelling to the UK, a specialist police unit that works to remove online content that breaches legislation, supporting community-based campaigns to rebut extremist propaganda. However, Lib Dems are aware of concerns about the scheme, claims that it spies on some communities, that it discriminates against Muslims, and that there is no clarity on how to measure its effectiveness. We must be sure that efforts to tackle terrorism do not stigmatise Muslims or other faith groups. Strategies must have the support of all communities. I've got a friend. She was actually a special advisor to one of the ministers in the last government. She's a Muslim, she wears a headscarf, and she's been spat on in the street in Glasgow. At the 2015 general election, Liberal Democrats promised to review the Prevent programme. We still want to do that. Liberal Democrats are committed to the Human Rights Act. At Westminster, as part of the coalition, we oppose Conservative plans to abolish it. We will continue to do so, and we will also fight to prevent the introduction of the Snoopers Charter. At Holyrood, we are opposed to SNP plans for a super ID database that will give access to the NHS Central Register to over 120 bodies. We're concerned that Police Scotland holds data from number plate recognition systems on over 850 million car number plate journeys, most of them by innocent motorists. We're concerned that Police Scotland has monitored online activity by journalists. We're concerned that Police Scotland has been using an industrial scale of stop and search, including children, without a legal basis. We believe that people should know who's trying to access their personal data and wish to follow the Estonian model, whereby citizens can see who has been accessing their confidential information. Liberal Democrats are concerned by the offensive behaviour at Football and Communications Act. Alison McInnes, MSP, as a member of the Justice Committee, did not sign up to the report. Our MSPs voted against the bill at every stage. If in government, Liberal Democrats would repeal the legislation. We feel it's better to have a community-wide response to sectarianism in football rather than this rush-through, poorly consulted on piece of legislation. Regarding refugees and asylum, Liberal Democrats have been doing much. I'm aware that the immigration bill is being debated today at Westminster. Party leader Tim Farron has been to Calais. He's been to Lesbos. He's calling for 3,000 minors to be allowed entry. Those already in Europe, and many of them have gone missing, as well as those in camps in the Middle East. In addition, the bill that's being debated today has Lib Dem laws amendments calling for an end to indefinite detention of those seeking asylum, a right to work after 6 months, and forbidding the detention of pregnant women. I'm the Scottish representative of Liberal Democrats for Seekers of Sanctuary, and I'm pleased that this afternoon our chair, Suzanne Fletcher, has been given an Achievement Award in Brussels for her work to support those who seek asylum in the UK. It was Suzanne who in the media exposed the scandal of red doors on Teesside, where asylum seekers' doors were painted red by the company that was giving the tenancies. From May, the Scottish Liberal Democrats hope to have more MSPs, and they will continue to speak out against infringements of human rights and civil liberties in Scotland, and work to ensure that everyone in Scotland has their fair say on issues that affect communities without fear of repercussions or discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let me put my faraway glasses on so I can see everybody. Right, now it's time to ask questions. So you're welcome to ask questions, and we'll take a few questions and then we'll go around the panel. I'll start with the lady on this side, yes?
Yeah, two questions actually, if that's okay. One is, what kind of leadership is it to say, oh, as the SNP speaker said, oh, the Prevent strategy's law now, so we can't do very much about it other than to try and amend it on the ground? Because I bring solidarity greetings from Edinburgh University students who are now occupying the university as we speak over Prevent. I bring solidarity greetings from the EIS Further Education that's taken a position. We will not implement it in the classrooms. We will not make these places unsafe and discriminatory for our students. And so do any of the speakers agree? Also, do any of the speakers agree that it is an absolute scandal that there's been no investigation into the police over the death of a young man, Shekubayo, in Kirkcaldy? This is not America. This has happened in the streets of Fife, that somebody died in police detention on the streets. What would the speakers do if they were elected about Shekubayo?
Thank you very much. The gentleman over there, yes.
I just want to say, I'm not trying to take history, but I'm proud of being Scottish and a British citizen. And I'm happy about this organisation's anti-racism and all that, but unfortunately I was a victim of racist attack. one racist attack is one attack too many, and I'm absolutely disgusted and appalled. And it's taken me 20 years to get over it recently. And basically, because I used to think everyone was against me, but I don't feel like that anymore. I wish the government would do something about it, you know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That gentleman there.
Thank you. I would like to know the difference between solidarity and rise. Where the policies differ, they seem to be very similar.
Okay, solidarity and rise. Okay, that's fine. We'll take one final question, then we'll come back to the rest. Okay? Yes, I'll take it.
It's about military recruitment in schools. So this is for the parties who propose it. I've worked with kids 11 to 18 since 2005, and I do agree that there is an issue with children not having enough to do outside of school, but I completely disagree with military recruitment. Those who don't agree with it, I would be really eager to hear what concrete ideas are you putting forward to actually offer as an alternative to that, to kind of give our young people alternatives to, I guess, bad choices on the street.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, why don't we start off with the military question? Alex, you were very keen on it, so let's hear your argument for that.
It's our future generation. We have to give these guys opportunities. If people don't want to join the military, it's their choice. I suppose the angle is the military taking unfair advantage over the other people who are offering jobs? I mean, every headmaster, every university is obliged to offer graduates and people leaving that school some sort of facility to find their next job and their next career. Now, traditionally, the military, for centuries, has gone to schools and asked people to join up. And it's sometimes been the saving time for those people. It's got them off the streets, off drugs, off crime, out of prison and into the army. They've seen the world, they found themselves in it. And the military isn't such a big employer anymore because of defence cuts. But I do think we should maintain any type of organisation that wants to go forward and employ young people from schools and from university. They should be free to do so and encouraged to do so, including the military. That's my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else on the panel want to come in on this? Yes.
So, as I said, we're very much against military recruitment in schools. I come at this from a few different angles. Certainly, where I come from, you have to pay a lot of money in student loans, and my mother pressured me to join the military as a way of paying those loans, and I refused. So I, for one, wouldn't want to pressure another young person to do something that I myself had to resist. In terms of what do we do with all those terrible young people that are just in such a state, oh dear, we'd better get them in the military. First of all, I think it's a terrible way to think of young people. That is not how we think of young people, as a sort of mess waiting to happen. Young people are full of potential, and we can reach that potential. In Edinburgh, we have something called the Edinburgh Guarantee. This is where we work together with people in the community, with businesses, to make sure that every person leaving school has a job to go to, training to go to, or further education to go to. It is one of the Scottish Greens' priority pledges to roll out the Edinburgh Guarantee to the whole country. It works very well in Edinburgh. It has increased the opportunities from young people. Something like 92% of young people leaving school in Edinburgh now have one of these three options available to them. We've improved it by 12% in the last couple of years, so I forget the details of it. If we roll that out to the whole country, which we can do, we have a model for it in Edinburgh, then we have hope for all young people, a guaranteed future for all young people. I don't think putting them in the military is the right thing to do. It shouldn't be the default choice. Going into the military, for those who have a calling for it, may be the right thing to do, but I'm not sure that people under the age of 18 really are consenting, really understand what they're getting into. It is a big deal to put your life on the line. To be trained to kill other human beings is a huge deal. This is why I didn't join the military, and I wouldn't force other young people to do that. Absolutely no military recruitment in schools.
Thank you very much. And then Colin?
I think that Scottish Labour is going into this election making education its #1 priority, and about using the powers that are coming to Holyrood in order to invest in education and public services more broadly. For example, we want to use the powers in relation to raising the 50 pence tax rate to ask the top 1% to pay a little bit more in order to invest exclusively in education with a Fair Start fund to address educational inequality. If you address educational inequality and the attainment gap, and you give everyone the best chance in life, then it doesn't come down to the point where the only option is the street or prison or the army. So that, I think that we need to address the inherent inequalities that we still have in our education system between the haves and the have-nots, which is frankly an absolute disgrace in this day and age in this country, that after almost 2 decades of devolution, that we still have 6,000 children leaving primary school without average ability to read and write. That just can't be right. What kind of life are we setting these kids up for? And when it comes to perhaps like kids in care, where you're more likely to end up in prison than you are in university. There are ingrained issues with poverty and educational inequality in this country, which reduce the life chances, and it's not, and so that you could be at 16 saying, I'm either going to end up in prison or I'm going to end up in the army. Scottish Labour wants there to be more choice, and we want to reduce the inequalities. And I think that by trying to do that, and as well as investing in after-school clubs and various other things, is how we stop that, catch-22 being the issue for them.
Okay, thank you very much. Colin?
Yeah, could I briefly touch on the 4 questions that were asked? On the prevent strategy, I suspect there's not any great difference between any of us in the platform we're out. So the only thing I'd say about the prevent strategy, the reason it's flawed is the British governments, Labour and Conservative consecutively, have asked the country to buy in to a warmongers, oppressive, imperialist agenda that the country has made it clear that we don't support. We want no part of it. I remember the anti-war movement. I look around the room, there's many, many veterans of that. We spoke on behalf of the majority. The government didn't give a monkeys about us, carried on regardless. So I would prefer, as a socialist and a secular democrat, the young people in this country were radicalised by socialist and democratic ideals rather than the reactionary lumpen views of ISIS and Daesh. But understand, it's a revolt against the forced loyalty to a government they can't stand that is driving their agenda. And can I just say on the question of Scotland and to our colleague at the back and the rest of it, I'm part of the Labour movement, the socialist movement, and we take the view that an injury to one is an injury to all. An injury to you is an injury and affront to all the rest of us. I came to Scotland, or came back to Scotland in 1995, and I was slightly taken aback by the amount of people who would say to me, after I lived 10 years in London, we don't have racism in Scotland. That's only something they have down south. And I thought, what are you talking about? Racism is about ignorance and stupidity. And I'm sorry to say we have ignorant and stupid people in Scotland. We've a long ways to go to eradicate it. And so I was affronted and ashamed, and I'm sorry when I hear anybody is subject to abuse because of the colour of their skin or where they come from. It's not part of the Scotland I want to be part of. To answer Cameron and to expose Cameron's a Conservative, so Cameron was the one who asked about the difference between Solidarity and Rise. And my answer is, on one hand, nothing, on the other hand, Tommy Sheridan. And then the last thing I'd say about military schools, military recruitment in schools is, I'm against the military having exclusive rights to get into our schools and encourage youngsters to join their service when it's not available to the National Health Service, it's not available to the local council, it's not available to other services in the country. And more importantly, since the question I asked, doesn't it equip people to avoid making bad choices in the street? I'll tell you what helps people avoid making bad choices in the street. Giving them £10 an hour, job security, a skill, some dignity at work, and an awful lot of that's in short supply in Edinburgh. I can tell you that as somebody who canvasses every day. And on the military, my grandfather was in the army, my dad was in the army. I spent some time in Germany as a youngster when my dad was doing his service. And the truth of the matter is, Britain has an unfortunate history and legacy of militarism. We spend far too much money on the military. We spend far too much money on nuclear weapons, I think you'll agree. And I would far rather see that money and those jobs deployed to civilian use, to progress in the world rather than threaten the world with nuclear or conventional annihilation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And just something I want to pick up with you, Alison. You said in your statement that to prevent that we have to do it differently. So do you want to say how does SNP want to do it differently in Scotland?
Well, where would I? I mean, in terms of prevent itself, I mean, I wish we could scrap it. I really do. I think all of us, it's quite agreeing across the panel that it's not the way we would want to do things. Here in Scotland, it's where we're at. It's very much about community cohesion and integration. I would be honest with you, as a teacher, as an Edinburgh teacher here, I hadn't heard. I was at a previous event a while back away in the early stages of the campaign, and I hadn't heard much about it as a teacher because we haven't had a training session. We haven't. Down in England, teachers are having to sit online training courses and get certificates at the end to prove that they've been through this training to identify potential terrorists and all of this. We don't have that, and I am not aware of that coming in that degree in schools as we speak. And I think it takes all of us. I actually think it takes all of us to make sure that doesn't happen. If I was elected, for instance, to be the MSP for this year, I would be speaking quite strongly about that, for that not to be brought into schools in that way. But at the moment, it's very much based in the community with the community police officers, but mainly that whole kind of integrating, welcoming, building up, understanding of each other and different opinions of each other. That's where we're at with it at the moment. Could I just finish in the
Sure.
military schools as well, because that at the moment actually any organisation, even NHS or anything, can come into schools. That's where it is. Schools are very, very open, and we love people to come into schools and to share their experience. I totally agree with Lorna in terms of the whole kind of disadvantage. I've worked with a lot of disadvantaged kids. I actually had a story about just 2 weeks ago of a young guy who's went into the army. He doesn't really want to go in, but he's got a background of fostering, a background that's quite sad, and they've found him in a vulnerable position. So as an SNP, what we're about is about empowering our young people. So it's free tuition will always be for us, modern apprenticeships, the young skills grants. It's about protecting vulnerable families by not doing the 1p tax. It's about ring fencing, 100 million to plough into head teachers to build up the education, the attainment fund of 750 million. It's through all of these things that we empower young people and we give them choice. And the thought for me, I mean, the petition is to be considered in the new Parliament, but I would be very sceptical of it personally because I understand the multifaceted poverty, the backgrounds of children, and the vulnerability of them at that moment if military are to come in and recruit.
Okay, thank you. I'm quite interested in also talking about racism in Scotland, as that gentleman has had some experience, and a few of us have had that experience, and about the Sheikh Abayu case where the way the police handled that case. So maybe if you want to try and comment on that. Jackie, you wanted to say a few words?
Yes, well, I'll change what was going to come in. I think, though, that racism, whatever it is, it's been around, a long time, thinking of things like the Spanish Inquisition, the expulsion of Jews in the Middle Ages, and that very much it is a thing to be targeted. It needs to start off from education of young people being used to people who are of a different colour, who are of a different race, who are of a different religion, and communities being open. That the very first refugee I met was a young woman called Badran Ishak. She came from Kampala. She was one of the Asians expelled by Idi Amin. Her father had had a chain of garages in Kampala. She'd been very well off. She came out of Uganda with a fountain pen, having seen her best friend murdered. I grew up in Sheffield, and Badran was the only Muslim girl in the school. And we all tried to support her as a class. Eventually she went to live in Leicester and went to work in a clothing factory. She'd wanted to be a nurse. But her experience of what she came from helped us understand people from, from a different background. That what we have found, though, is some of the Daily Mail, Daily Express headlines stirring up the UKIP, the UKIP supporters in particular. I've been on panels like the one we're on tonight, where real nasty comments saying the people from Eastern Europe are taking all the jobs, taking all the houses. And that when you get that sort of thing being put into the media and people believing it, I think that is really concerning as, as something that we'd have to tackle. The other thing that I have personally had is, you'll gather I'm English, and I found that the Scottish referendum campaign, having been up here since 1981, and before that in Wales, that it was only during that referendum campaign that I started getting the anti-English, you go home to your, to your beloved homeland, from some people in the community. And that is another thing that we really have to try and heal. We have to have communities working together. Everybody's got something to offer. And anybody who experiences racism or discriminatory behaviour about their religion or whatever, like my friend in Glasgow who's been spat at just because she's wearing a headscarf, we've really got to tackle that, but it begins in the classroom.
Okay, thank you. I was looking for more specifics, but we'll move on. Kevin, and then we'll go to Kate, and then we'll go back for some questions. So, Kevin?
Just your question in terms of the tragedy in Fife for this young man. I think that anybody who's in the, no matter what their background is in hands of the police where there's a death, there must be a public inquiry. Without any doubt, it must go ahead. And I hope that does happen.
Okay, thank you.
And just in terms of, my experience, and when there is times of austerity and poverty, movements like the Scottish Defence League, housing estates in the peripheral of Edinburgh, like Wester Hales and Nidri and Portland, have become a recruitment ground for these people. And the blame culture does come in. Not that there's a lack of services, nothing to do with that, or there's a lack of government putting money in to try and empower young people, to give them an education, to get them into decent employment. They go for the blame culture, and just like you said before, sorry, very much fueled by the right-wing media as well. That doesn't help, doesn't do us any favours whatsoever to fuel the fire of racism in our country.
Okay, thank you. Kate, you want to?
Yes, so to take on the topic of racism, on your experience and on the really shocking case of Sheikh Abayu, I think it really shows that racism is alive and well in Scotland, regardless of what we would like to think. And we need to tackle that in a way, not that scaremongers and divides community like the Prevent strategy has been doing, but in a positive way. Now, I recently learned that of the 1,222 councillors in Scotland, only 4 of them are women of colour. Now, if you can't, it's an old adage, if you can't see it, you can't be it. We need to have positive role models for people in society so that firstly people feel included, and secondly so that people who would seek to exclude them see that they're already part of society and they can't then do that. I do also believe that on the Prevent strategy, yes, it's a reserved matter and there's a limited amount that we can do, but when I was walking here, I read on Twitter that the Edinburgh University students were occupying the library and will be there until 2:30 AM this evening and prevent the library closing. I think that's incredible. That's the only thing we can do. It's completely toothless to say we're powerless in this situation. Organisations can make a change and can refuse to implement the policies of Prevent, and that's the only way that we can do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, let's take some more questions. This lady here.
Hi there. I'm from the Refugee Action Scotland, very new group set up in direct response to the current refugee crisis. And I've been in Cali or communities, and I've seen the failings of the European Union and the government here. There's children in Cali that are basically dying, rotting on a landfill site. I've been there. I spent 3 days doing medical aid there. I saw the state of people. These people are being demonised. And it's just shocking. I am utterly disgusted, and I think we should all be ashamed. This is the worst humanitarian crisis since the Second World War, and this is not a legacy that I want. But not only that, it's your story about the gentleman from Bosnia who came, and he didn't know where he was coming. Well, actually, 3 of the refugees that came in the new scheme to Scotland, they didn't know where they were coming until they got on the plane. So they came from Lebanon, they were told to get on a plane, and they didn't know where they were going until they got on the plane. And then they were told to come to Scotland. That is not acceptable. And the housing that a lot of refugees have been put in Glasgow is disgusting. Subcontract from Serco to Orchard and Shipman. I've been in these houses, I've seen how these people are treated. Things have to change. And I would like to know what all of you are going to do about it and how you're going to change this.
Okay, thank you very much.
The cuts and unemployment and all those sorts of things feed racism. We all know that. And I just want to ask the panel what their attitude is towards the cuts, because I do know that in Edinburgh, hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs are at risk. Labour and Labour and SNP. In Glasgow, it's the same sort of thing. What's the attitude of the panel towards the cuts driven by austerity? But actually, it's all about the bankers, as we said earlier.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, the lady over there.
I'm going to say something quite burst up a little bit, but I'm going to say anyway. I left the UK 3.5 years ago looking for better opportunities. I spent all my life in Scotland, and I left looking for better opportunities. I was educated in Scotland. My father's not Scottish. And I left and I moved to Sri Lanka first and then the Middle East. And I lived in the Middle East. I lived in Iraq and Saudi Arabia for roughly 2 years. Now, I was safer there. I was safer in Iraq and in Kurdistan and in Saudi Arabia than I was here. I had more freedom there. I wasn't spied on there. I didn't feel like everything I did was monitored by the government or the government would interfere in some way. My quality of life was better. I had more educational and employment opportunities. Now, this is in a country that's in countries that are apparently backwards in comparison to the West. But I also came across the attitude, very, very sexist, misogynistic attitude towards women. I was sexually harassed on a daily basis by 2 or 3 men, some men that were married that I knew, and these were in Muslim countries. And I was basically told that it was a man's right to do whatever he wanted to do or say to a woman, because that is their culture, that is their religion. And then I come back to the UK and I hear everyone saying that we should welcome refugees. I completely agree, you should welcome refugees. If people are escaping from such horror, we should welcome them. It's safe here, it's safer here for them than it is there. But how, as each party, I haven't heard anyone addressing the fact that these refugees that are coming here are going into poor communities, and some of them do have an ideology that women are second-class citizens. Women are not equal to men, and women are of less value than men are. I think you have to address that fact. That is a fact. And you can't just say it doesn't exist, because these people are mixing in communities that are largely uneducated, poor, disenfranchised, and possibly more easily influenced than...
Can I just ask you, what's your actual question? What's the question you're asking?
What's your approach to that? I mean, it is a fact that people from these countries, from Syria, from Iraq, from Middle Eastern countries, have...
So you want to ask them, they have cultural differences, what are you going to do about that?
How do you approach that? Do you approach it, or just do you welcome?
Okay, thank you very much. That lady there.
Yes, slightly related, different. Kate mentioned that women's rights are human rights. Is there any party in Scotland who would mention that men's rights might be human rights as well? Is there any party concerned about some of the inequalities out there that affect men more than they affect women? And there are quite a few. And I would just as a woman, I really think we shouldn't be forgetting inequalities that affect men, and I could list a few if you want.
That's fine.
But you probably know.
Okay.
I mean, one of them is, well, violence. More men experience violence. Fewer domestic violence, but a huge proportion nevertheless, very significant proportion. Boys are achieving less educationally compared to girls. Access to university, girls are way ahead of boys now. It's quite a concern in a lot of places. Deaths at work, over 90%. Life expectancy, health, 4 times the level of suicide. The vast majority of homeless people, school expulsions, it goes on and on. Is there any party willing to speak about that?
If you just want to hang on, okay. We'll take Richard's question and then we'll come back for a final round of questions, okay?
Yeah, just interested in Alex's support for military recruitment in schools, because that isn't in fact British Army policy. You know, the Army accepts that the Army is quite a lot different from other employers. It involves killing people are being shot at. So the Army's position is that recruitment in schools would be wrong, and it doesn't do it. The problem is that we think, in fact, it does do it, that the way it conducts itself in schools does in fact push people into joining the Army. But it's rather interesting that Alex seems to be making a case for a stronger form of recruitment in schools than the Army actually support. Alison was quite critical of the prevent strategy as set out in the legislation that is implemented in England. That puts her in fairly clear opposition to the Scottish Government, which takes a position of strong and unequivocal support for prevent as set out in the legislation. She was commenting that she hasn't really encountered it in schools. That's probably the case. It's rolling out in schools at the moment. Guidance teachers are getting, across Scotland, are getting prevent training at the moment, and other teachers, all other teachers, I believe, are scheduled to get their prevent training at the end of the summer break. There was a comment from the audience about the occupation going on now at Edinburgh University Library. The students are in occupation against the application of prevent by Edinburgh University. The university says that it's doing that because prevent is the law. It's important to be really clear. The only way that the university can be compelled to do that is if the Prevent Oversight Board makes a recommendation for Theresa May to seek a court order, which she would do at the Court of Session in Edinburgh, and could then be served on the university. Now, if the Prevent Oversight Board deals with a public body in Scotland, Scottish ministers have to be present on it. So my question to the panel is, would you make a commitment in Parliament to pressing the Scottish Government to oppose any recommendation by the Prevent Oversight Board for a court order to be sought against public bodies in Scotland, like the university, if they choose not to implement prevent in the way set out in the legislation?
Okay, that's fine, thank you very much. Right, we've got quite a host of topics there. This lady... 6 questions. Well, I'll let you guys handle it. About the scapegoating of refugees, you know, how we can do more for them over there and over here because they come into poor communities, bad accommodation. Lorna spoke about the cuts and austerity and how that's affecting jobs here, people here. The lady spoke about refugees again, how we can get them settled in here despite the cultural and maybe political differences. Women's rights, human rights, men's rights, the differences there, and about prevent if the parties would be willing to support if the Prevent Oversight Board implemented action against, for example, university. Okay, so let's see who shall we let's just start at one end and just work our way along if we don't mind. So If you want to start with Jackie?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Thinking about the refugees that, as I was saying in my speech, that Liberal Democrats have been very involved with the whole scenario of asylum seekers and refugees since well before little baby Alan was sadly washed up on that Turkish beach. That I'm with Liberal Democrats for Seekers of Sanctuary. It was an amendment of mine to a motion at a Lib Dem conference that became legislation to stop the detention of children in the asylum system. That came in as part of the coalition, and one of the things that I do think the coalition did manage to get right.
Okay, can we just concentrate, rather than what's happened in the past, on what you want to do?
No, but still, very much, things have got to change. Friends of mine have been to Calais. One of them coming back, she was picked up by the UK border agency, asked where she'd been. She said she'd been to Calais, and then it was the third degree as to what had it got to do with her. Her daughter has been tear-gassed in the jungle. So really, the way that the French are treating people has been really bad. As I was saying earlier, that there is the debate on today, the immigration bill, and our peers have got amendments in that, wanting to stop the detention of pregnant women, wanting to end indefinite detention of those seeking asylum, and particularly there's an amendment by Lord Dubs, who's a Labour peer, wanting to bring in more unaccompanied children, those who are in Europe already, who are really vulnerable and at risk, as well as those in the camps in the Middle East. It's actioning by the Scottish Parliament and by Westminster that we have to really take the bull by the horns and make sure that this really large-scale humanitarian crisis, it's the biggest since the war, that these people are treated with dignity, and that when they come, that they are put into decent housing, and that they are given the supports, if need be, the English language lessons, and helped and made welcome, you know, in the country. That you know, I think it is really important that we have to do our job, and the EU making links with Turkey and people being sent back, the boundaries that have been built by countries like Hungary, that is really bad. We're really letting these people down. That you don't risk your life on a little dinghy, you don't risk your children's life because of just wanting to be somewhere better. People are in real danger, and we have to tackle that.
Okay, thank you very much. Kat?
I'll try and be as brief as possible, but I'll try and cover as many of the questions as possible. In relation to what you're talking about in refugees, I said in my opening remarks, and since the Scottish Labour would introduce a refugee integration bill, which would set out rights to access to services, as well as enshrining national standards for integration of law in relation to language and interpretation services, and also simplify Scots law in which, as it is relevant to refugees. I think that we need to provide more than just a home. We need to provide a life that is meaningful and that is safe and is also enjoyable for them once they are here, and that their community, that they're not just put in somewhere that no one else would live. It has to be. It can't just be out of the frying pan and into the fire. And I think that then in relation to the cuts question, sir, can't see you. Hello. Scottish Labour wants to use the powers to stop the cuts. Alison made reference to the 1p tax affecting vulnerable families. That is completely misleading in relation to Scottish Labour, and actually, to be fair, the Lib Dems policy in relation to using the Scottish rate of income tax. A 1p tax, as Scottish Labour's plan would not affect anyone earning less than £20,000 would not pay any more tax than they do right now. And in fact, across the broad sweep of Scottish Labour's tax proposals, which includes abolishing the council tax and replacing it with a property tax, those on average incomes would actually be slightly better off. Those with the broadest shoulders will pay the most, and it's all of that money. The IPPR has said that the Scottish Labour's plans could raise up to 1.2 billion extra a year in tax. Imagine the difference that could make to our communities, our local services, our public services, and again, addressing some of the issues in relation to refugees that we've talked about. Number 3, in relation to how you deal with assimilating people from different cultures, from different worlds, particularly in relation to women's rights and attitudes towards women. I think it would be wrong to say that everyone from those societies holds those beliefs. I think that would be a stereotyping view, but I think that it would be also wrong to say that there are differences in relation to the attitudes towards women. But those attitudes towards women also exist in Scottish and in British culture already. I mean, there was...
They're not as aggressive and they're not blatant and they're not condoned.
Well, last week, 2 weeks ago, there was a guy in the paper who murdered his flatmate because she refused to have sex with him, right? There are horrific attitudes... Well, what I'm saying is that attitudes towards women have to be addressed in all societies, all cultures, all faiths, and all ethnicities in this country. There are some pretty disgusting attitudes towards women. There are disgusting attitudes towards lesbian, gay and transsexual people in this country, and I think that we need to address it. Has to be done in the classroom in relation to, I think particularly my own personal views, that I think that we need to have mandatory consent education in schools in order to address issues in relation to relationships and particularly in relation to how technology and relationships and gender issues and relationship issues are developing in this country, because I think that technology is meaning that there are things that I don't, I think I've given up pretending that I'm a young person, despite the fact that I'm only 31. But, the fact that sexting is a standard thing, apparently, for children, which I find really shocking. But how do we deal with those issues, and how do they ingrain sexual stereotypes and also the power differential that exists between men and women in relationships? So we could spend all night discussing this, but unfortunately the rest of my panel, and I think we all want to get home before midnight. Men's rights. Men do get sometimes left behind in this conversation, but I think that to say that there are a lot of the issues that you talk about, I think, stem from problems with mental health and this country's attitudes, because suicide, homelessness, and a lot of the issues where in relation to health inequalities that affect men more than women, I think a lot of them have at their root mental health problems. And I think that our current system in relation to being able to provide mental health services is not good enough. And our culture in relation to men seeking help in relation to mental health services isn't good enough. And I think that there are a lot of issues that you've released in relation to inequalities affecting men. In relation to some of them, I think that getting mental health right, and in relation to having better conversations with men about how they approach their mental health, would be a very good start. There were other questions, but I think I've spoken for long enough.
Colin.
Yeah, can I say it's now 8:45. I'm glad for those questions, because now we're going to open up some right divisions between the panels. These questions are welcome. The first question you asked, which is bludgeoning us out of our complacency, the idea that we treat people who come here seeking asylum and refugees like they're Jock Thompson's bear, and we give them a warm welcome, a cuddle at Edinburgh Station, the rest of it is an insult to our intelligence. It's good that you raised the question, because quite frankly, Labour, Liberals and the Tories in the past 10 or 20 years have pandered to an agenda set by UKIP on this question. I'll give you an example. Nigel Farage, comes up with the idea that immigrants and refugees shouldn't get access to the NHS or our public services for 5 years, didn't he? We know that's his position. And in the Parliament, Labour, Liberal and Tory mock outrage. How dare he? What an insult. How dare he? Let's make it 3 years. I remember 2014, New Year's Day, 2014, I was probably one of the few people in Scotland that were sober. But the BBC used that day, from 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night, live from Bucharest bus station in Romania. It was the day that Romania joined the EU. BBC correspondents, radio, television, internet, you name them, dozens of them. Of course, they were the only people in Bucharest bus station on New Year's Day. But they'd all built up this great crescendo. They're coming, the Romanians are coming, run for the hills, 50,000 of them coming, access to our health services, access to our social security. They're all going to arrive at London Victoria Station in 10 hours' time, and they're all going to be signing on round the corner. Nothing happened. There wasn't there. It was like Buchanan Street bus station on New Year's Day, quite frankly. There was nobody there except them. But what happened is the BBC had just bitten on the hook set for them by UKIP. And the fact of the matter is, the right-wing press, aided and abetted by Labour, the Liberals and the Tories in Parliament, have fed the population a diet of poison on these questions for far too long. So it's good that you raise the question, and this panel needs to be honest. And Labour, the Liberals and the Tories need to stand up and say, we've been wrong on this question, our hands aren't clean in the way we've treated immigrants and asylum seekers and people seeking refuge in this country. The two other quick things I wanted to mention, I'm not going to go through other questions, Zahid, you'll be delighted to know. Two other distinct differences, that the questioner asked about cuts and austerity. Rise doesn't support cuts. Not now, not ever, because cuts to public services that are already inadequate, that working class people rely on, are utterly unacceptable. In this city, Labour, Liberals, SNP, Tories have all made cuts. They make cuts at the council level. They made cuts at national government level, at Holyrood and in London. It's utterly unacceptable. Utterly unacceptable to make cuts to vulnerable people's services that they rely on. And none of those parties can claim they're against cuts. I watched Nicola Sturgeon for the past year. The SNP's anti-austerity. We're against this kind of austerity at this time. It's not the same thing. The inference being that you're in favour of other austerity at another time. And it's not good enough. We've just seen in this Scottish Parliament election, the political issue that dominated in this city and continues to dominate is that 17 of our schools are falling down, built by cowboys who compromised our kids' education, disrupted their education and their safety, and we find out those schools don't even belong to us. They're privately owned under Labour's PPP, just the same as the Royal Infirmary is privately owned by the Royal Bank of Scotland. So they're in favour of cuts, they're in favour of austerity, they're in favour of privatisation. And again, the SNP, unfortunately, privatised the sick kids' hospital in this city. So it's time people were honest here and came in front of us and defended their position rather than talking right, talking left and acting right, talking you're against cuts and actually making them, talking you're against austerity and privatisation and making them. And to the final question, the lady raises a really interesting point. As a socialist, I want human rights for everybody. I'm in favour of equality for men and women, and of course, the nature of the system we live under is called capitalism. It's exploitative. It conditions men and women. Men suffer from conditioning that's conditioning delivered by the ruling classes to keep them in their place. Young men, I was on the Justice Committee of the Scottish Parliament, as you know, Zahid, for 4 years. Violence in Scotland is largely perpetrated by young men on other young men. And we need to face up to that. Scotland is a violent culture, and it's young men, often inarticulate, often unable to express themselves, hold down relationships. Look at our prisons. Record numbers of young laddies in jail. We fail young men. We fail men in this society. We fail women in this society. We want equality on the basis of a far higher standard for us all. That's what makes me a socialist. That's what makes me understand capitalism will never deliver it. It's exploitative. It oppresses men and women together.
Thank you.
I'll hit these points as quickly as I can. The Scottish Green Party, I'm not going to pretend we're going to be the party of government. We're not. But we are polling to get 10 to 12 MSPs. Our role, as we see in this, is to push the Scottish Government to be bolder. We're expecting an SNP majority, and so what matters here is the other voices that are going to be in Parliament. Do you want a Green voice, or do you want, Tories pulling one way, us pulling another? That's what we're here to talk about. In terms of the refugee crisis question, yeah, that's in our manifesto, a safe route to Britain, more refugees, arguing over 3,000 children. That's how many washed up in one day to Greece. It's a ridiculous number. Cuts. You'll see in our manifesto, again, we have a comprehensive tax overhaul plan, scrap council tax, progressive, rebanded property taxes, highly progressive income tax to pay for services. If we want Scandinavian levels of public services, we have to pay Scandinavian levels of tax. However, what we're not for is centralisation. We feel that your tax money is best spent when you have a say in it, when your local community is able to decide how your tax money is spent. That's the radical local democracy aspect of the Green Party, and that's a differentiator between us and other parties. In terms of the, where are we going? Men's rights. Men's rights, I agree with my Labour colleague. What we talk about when we mean men's rights is a lot to do with mental health. I think it's a lot to do with class as well. But what concerns me is we've just had this conversation about recruiting people in school. As we know, one of the tragedies we have in our country is veterans returning. So they were recruited as young men, sent off to war, given a very specific skill set, a very specific lifestyle. Then we throw them back into society, and they're not prepared for it. They don't know how to build relationships. It's a disaster. And here we're talking about, you mentioned the effects of that on those vulnerable men. Here we've got the cause of that. If we stop that, we'll help prevent some of those problems as well. And the last one I want to come at is the lady's question up there about multiculturalism. I'm deeply uncomfortable talking about racism. Human beings don't come whiter than me, honestly, and this panel is extremely white. I'm not sure any of us are qualified to talk about racism because we haven't experienced it. I am an immigrant, I am a woman, but I do come from a country where multiculturalism is regarded to be a success, and there are certain things that you can do with that. One of the things, for example, is political correctness. I know it's got a bad press here, but honestly, political correctness is about considering other people's feelings before your own interests. And that's a small thing we can all do to help us get along with each other. I'm a bit shocked by the idea that all those people over there are sexist boors. We're in an equal society. 85% of our wealth is owned by men. Our parliaments are stuffed with men. I'm an engineer. I'm the only woman in the company that I work for. Let's work on ourselves before we start pointing fingers at other people. When people come to our country, we expect there to be a back and forth, a sharing of values, not just us imposing our values on them. We have things to learn from other people too. Let's work on integrating ourselves together, and that's why we do support the Scottish Government's Race Equality Framework Scotland, which is about us all working together and not just us imposing our views. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I'll just go through the questions in a slightly different order. To take first your question about REACT. I've actually followed REACT since they started, and I applaud your work. I think you do an incredible job, and I am sorry that you've had to step in to take the place of where the government has shirked its responsibility as regards refugees. I think the Dubs Amendment is, as you said earlier, the least that we can do. There was an estimate that there were around 400 unaccompanied children in the Calais camp. And when that was bulldozed, we have no idea what happened to them. One thing we do know is that human traffickers have made $4 billion out of the refugee crisis. And that's something that we're particularly concerned about vulnerable women and children that are sold into trafficking. They're promised that they'll be taken out of a war zone and into a safe society, and they end up in sexual or domestic slavery. That's something that we need to tackle immediately, and the Women's Equality Party would like to set up a destitution fund so that people who have insecure immigration status or who are refugees still awaiting social security are able to have access to have enough money to survive on. And we'd also like to draw attention to the plight of vulnerable women who are ending up in the sex trade because of their immigration status. The International Organization for Migration put out a really shocking statistic recently that of over 4,000 Nigerian women that came into Italy as refugees, 80% of them ended up in the sex trade. That's not what they left their country for. That is not what they're fleeing war to find, and that's something we need to tackle. To move on to your question about cuts, 85% of public sector cuts have fallen on women, and we have double our income coming from social security compared to men. So it's very much an issue for the Women's Equality Party. One major thing that we would like to see change, we support the living wage, and that's the real living wage, not the Chancellor's living wage that has an embarrassment to the living wage campaign. We'd also like to see that extended to carers. It's a sector of work that's extremely undervalued in our society, despite the fact all of us need care at some point. It's an area where the vast majority of unpaid carers are women who have left employment to care for someone in their family or someone close to them. And I really think that we need to be properly recompensing people who bring so much benefit to our society and are sincerely undervalued. To move on then to, if I can tackle the question of men's rights first. We're the Women's Equality Party, but to elevate women in society is not to bring men down, it's to bring women up, and the two are not mutually exclusive. We have a number of policies which I suppose would be directly improving men's rights. For example, we believe in equal parenting. We believe that both parents should share the joys and the burdens of parenthood, and we'd like to see equal, fairly paid parental leave for both parents. We'd also like to see a societal shift that allows men to take time off work to look after their children and be part of their children's lives. I think that would tackle a couple of problems. Firstly, it would nip in the bud this idea that fathers should be out working and women should be at home caring for the children. And also, it would give young boys a father figure around that they could look up to, and I think that would help to tackle a lot of the issues around what starts as stereotypes and turns into toxic masculinity and leads to all kinds of issues with mental health and violence later on in life. And then finally, to tackle the issue of cultural differences, I think that to say that misogyny is an ideology exclusive to either refugees or to other parts of the world is, well, perhaps not that it's exclusive.
The problem with political correctness, you're using language, very flowery language. I didn't say that. I said these people come from an area where it's very common and it's normal to treat women as second-class citizens. So you bring these attitudes here. I never said what you just said. Don't put words in my mouth. Don't accuse me. That's almost calling you racist. I am not a racist.
No, I'm not calling you racist. I didn't say you said those things. No, okay, fine. If, to take directly what you said then, that people are coming from an area where these attitudes are commonplace. We come from an area where these attitudes are commonplace. We do. Misogyny is a part of this society.
Where female genital mutilation is normal. You do not come from an area where it's normal for women to be sexually harassed when they walk down the street.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Every single.
Happens in the Middle East. You would have to say normal. To the panel when you've asked them a question. Most of the panel haven't actually answered. They've avoided that.
Well, if you let the lady answer, please. Thank you.
Before I asked it, it's going to put your back up and you're not going to.
It's fine. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. If you let them answer, please.
I would never call you a racist. I wasn't saying that you said those opinions. I was saying there are opinions which are held. Sexual harassment is something that is experienced. I'm sure almost every single woman in this room has a story about sexual harassment. I was the last Hustings I went to on the way home. I was sexually harassed. It's a part of our lives, which is unacceptable. And I think that it is. Of course, there's differences in different cultures, but we have to acknowledge that the issue is not cultural difference that leads to misogyny. It's misogyny is a problem in itself that is shared around the world. In this country, 2 women a week are killed by their partners. 1 in 3 of us experience sexual violence in our lifetimes. I went to a university which has one of the worst rates of sexual assault in the entirety of the UK. And if we can't acknowledge that this is a problem that we all face and a problem that is equally as prevalent in this country as it is in other countries, then we're never going to solve it. Violence against women is one of the major barriers to women's participation in politics, in business, in education. It's a huge problem. I think that we could solve it. We need to prioritise it. I would like to see us ring fencing support for women's services. At the moment, you get, if you run an organisation such as a rape crisis centre or another specifically women's service, as with many charities, you get, if you're lucky, 2 years of funding, generally 1 year of funding. I'd like to see us ring fencing that to ensure that these vital frontline services are able to deliver what the incredible work that they do. But And also I would like to see more support for victims of domestic violence, which I think is one of the most prevalent forms of male violence against women in this society. 1 in 4 homeless women or homeless people are women who have been victims of domestic abuse, and we need to do more to support them. For example, we should be putting them to the top of council house allocation lists, because they're often very, very vulnerable, have no personal financial funds, and often have children with them as well. So to kind of summarise what I'm saying, we...
Thank you very much. Kevin, would you like to...
Yeah, I think I'll be a bit briefer than most people.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Just in terms of violence against men, yeah, I'm well aware about through the work that I do with Salton Prison in terms of prisoners that are released back into the community. The violence in prisons is still rife with men and Street for Stockton. Also rape men as well, and a lot is not spoken about. A lot is not acknowledged, and they don't bring it forward because of the stigma that goes along with it. And there's a lack of services probably for men, that they can open up and get some help when they went through such a terrible life. In terms of refugees, I touched on it before, the work that I did with the Bosnian people that came over. I think we've got to learn that this is going to happen. There's going to be refugees that are coming into our communities, and this time we have to be more set up, we have to be more aware. There has to be a multi-agency approach where they're coming together. We need to get professionals round that are from housing associations, from education, from health, from children and families, that we can make sure that people are integrated into the community and all their needs are met. But we also have to educate the community as well, because people have touched on it before. The vile rubbish that they get fed from the right-wing media, that a lot of people unfortunately start believing. We need to educate the community that why these people are here, and why they're coming into communities, and why they're seeking refuge. And it's quite ironic when we talk about cuts. Unfortunately, we know that most refugees will go into the housing estates where we call them areas of deprivation. They will go into places where they are closing the local community centres because of the cuts. They're closing the local libraries because of the cuts. They're closing services to young people. We talk about young people who join the army and looking for alternatives. They're closing down the youth centres. That's why young people are taken to the streets at times. So unfortunately, we've got we do have a lot of barriers, but it's not an ideal place to put refugees, but it's something that's going on, and there's a lot of people that are suffering in the communities as it is, and because they feel so isolated and almost forgotten about, then sometimes the blame culture can be fueled again when refugees come into the community, so we really have to prepare people for that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alex.
Yeah, just to stand up. I think a lot of the points have been answered, but I'll just go through them. History is full of migrants. History has stories of migrants, refugees, of inequality. We as a Western democracy, one of the most advanced Western democracies in the world, I'm sure we can always improve on those three areas. Now, the lady mentioned there about men, which is it's a good balance, because of course females are important and males are important. The emasculation of men, they have the highest suicide rate. The most homeless people are males. 90% of our prison are men. The majority of unemployed people are men. Now, what is going on here? I think that we have a hidden problem. It's called families, the family institution. The family institution is the bedrock of society, and if we ignore that and that institution, it is at our peril. We've talked about lots of other subjects. Marriages are on the decline now. I think they're below 50%, about 45%. You've got a whole swathe of new kids coming onto the market with single parenting. You know, there's no stigmatisation of single parenting. My sister is one, and I've helped her in that. We need to. This is all cross-party. This is being apolitical, and to all of you out here, is helping the family institution, and behind the family institution undergirds is local community, and local community is local ownership, local jobs, and empowering our councils and giving them more authority in terms of their area. And if you get a centralist government that takes away authority from the local community, then our villages and our towns suffer. People live on their own. Loneliness is on the up. So what do? You go for a party that goes for less government, goes for decentralising decisions and empowering local authority and building up your local community and building up family. With family becomes stronger. Education, children are more empowered, family look after elderly better, they're better carers, they're better child carers. Concentrate on the family.
How are you going to do that? You're not giving any details.
Okay, I'll tell you how. My sister mentioned it, but she goes to there's a vast increase in AA. Narcotics, alcoholics. So as society heads south in all the figures... what, to London? Sorry? No. Possibly. We try and put a lot of money into education, we try and put a lot of money into universities. I think the critical fact, and the SNP had it with this baby box, is if every parent was taught how to become a better parent, so they can see how they can impact that kid when it reaches the age of 12 or 15, and how it can either be a destroyer of society or a constructor of society. And if you have a strong family unit, a kid isn't just brought up by the family, it's brought up by the larger community. So there's Cameron brought it out, and it's called the Family Impact Statement. Australia saw it coming, and they put the Family Impact Statement. So every law that came out on the whole land, if it affected the family institution, it would...
law affects any family, one way or another, so...
Yeah, it would be altered. I know,
Sorry, you're talking about family units, but in times of austerity, there are so many families that are breaking down due to conservative austerity measures.
You may be a better parent if you can...
Because of conservative measures, you're standing up here going, we should have a family unit. When your government is actually breaking down these family units by austerity. Sorry, you don't make any sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. You've got it. In society, and most of Western Europe, and all of us, we put money and economy as God in front of our better decisions for family, for right decisions, moral decisions. Now we had it. Ian Duncan Smith stepped away. The guy was bringing very good decisions to bring fairness to our benefit system, and unfortunately,
One of my stepdad's best friend just committed suicide 2 weeks ago due to austerity measures. He was a very, very, very sick man on disability benefits, and due to PIP cuts, he committed suicide.
He's not the only one.
And he's somebody that I grew up with. So this was Ian Duncan Smith. Due to his rulings, my stepdad's best friend committed suicide 2 weeks ago. I was there on phone when my stepdad found his best friend covered in blood. And you're citing that as a good measure. Sorry.
Okay, guys. The question is, it's a difficult for any government, and the SNP government will likely to come to power again. It is a decision. What do? Do you put austerity and cut benefits, or do you and start affecting the vulnerable people, or not. There is a balance, or pay your debts off. There is a balance, and we all have to put our heads together to find the right balance to it. Yeah, and IDS almost had it. He almost had it. People don't like it, but I think he had it.
Thank you very much. Right, finally, Alison, can you wrap things up for us, please?
I really don't know where to begin. I think it's too tempting. I have to start with cuts, I'm afraid.
Go for it.
I was going to start with refugees. I'll probably come back to that in a little second. We have to get rid of the stigma that is poverty and inequality, and we have to stop judging people on their life circumstances. I'm a great believer that there, but for a set of circumstances, could be any one of us in this situation. It's one of the biggest things in society, and it's where the Conservatives and the Westminster government, these people, you know, and I think we're all just as important. So, the SNP, right from the very beginning, we've voted right against the working welfare reform. We've been a strong voice down there against austerity, because multifaceted poverty, I know that because I work with families and schools, and it reeks. And the SNP is about a growth agenda. And I would be honest and say I'm getting a wee bit tired, you know, of hearing this Labour line that keeps coming to us all the time about the cuts. Now, I know that we have some difficult decisions to make in terms of, you know, council budgets and all of that. I am well aware of it. But universalism, we're protecting, you know, free prescriptions, free school meals. We've mitigated the bedroom tax. We've spent millions in a Scottish welfare fund. We've got modern apprenticeships. We've passed 30,000 affordable housing. We're bringing in baby boxes, new social security powers that are, you know, covering the Scottish welfare, addressing some of these things, and disability benefits, keeping them at levels, jobs grants. It goes on. And I kind of get a wee bit frustrated because I'm in this. Because I care about people. And I'm in this because I really care. And I'm sure every one of us actually in this table, and I'm not going to say any one of us don't, but we do. And I just get a wee bit tired when you feel you are delivering things and that's not raised enough. So we're about a growth agenda, empowering people. It's wider than just tax. It's a right across the board, strong public services and everything. Refugees. Yeah, I mean, I know. Yeah, we've had this discussion before, and I'm with you. What I'd like to say is, I teach a Syrian refugee, and she's just beautiful, and our sister, and I would love it if every refugee's experience could be like that, because we have a good situation. You know, we just before I went on election leave at Easter holidays, we had the planning meeting, all the partners sitting round the table, checking how they were. We know their housing's good because I know the situation, all these things, just getting the support in school. But I know that's not the situation for lots of them, and especially down in Glasgow. Angus Robertson, an SNP, he raised this, he raised a Prime Minister's questions, he raised the fact about the poor treatment. We support the Scottish Commission of Human Rights calling the House of you know, basically to about the substandard housing. We know that, and that's why it's about a long-term strategy. The support is reserved, but it's finding out how we can use all of our powers, as well as what I've just mentioned in wider. The access to the NHS, the free prescriptions, that's available. What I'd also like is being considered as part of the resettlement programme as well, is, you know, to actually examine like free tuition for any you know, refugees that are wanting to, you know, to do university degrees or whatever. That's another option. That's all getting explored as part of this whole kind of long-term strategy. What else am I on? I can't remember now. Women. It's about education for us all. I know I'll go back to this. I know I bore people with this education, but it is. You know, I have the whole kind of, you know, domestic violence. I understand about men's rights, and I totally am with what you've just said there about the men as well. But I come from a domestic violence background, so I know how women have been touched in so many different ways with inequality. Even just getting to this moment in politics is hard enough, I can tell you, as a woman. So we've been doing lots. I mean, you know, Nicola, she's been commended for her 50-50, you know, cabinet. We're encouraging, you know, some of those powers are reserved, but we're encouraging organisations to get prepared with the 50-50 boards. we're considering like the kind of psychological element of domestic violence, which is so pushed under the carpet so often. We're doing lots in that area. But I think it's about educating us all. Going back to that lady at the back, I understand about the cultures because I know some of my pupils who come from backgrounds. It goes wide, but it's about education. It's about right from the very beginning having that diversity. It's going back to all of that kind of celebrating diversity, promoting openness and an open mind. Going back to finish, I know you're waiting for this answer, but the prevent. We've had this conversation before. All I can say to you is, I understand the frustrations and it is reserved and we are focusing, it is totally on the kind of community cohesion. I can't speak and make a decision on what I don't know. You're telling me it's been rolled out in schools. I know that it's a quality indicator as part of the HIGIOS, which is a kind of document to do with schools and quality indicators. So that's all I know. It's an addition, and it's at the moment from where I'm standing as a teacher in a primary school, I should say so. It's about keeping with that curriculum for excellence, keeping encouraging diversity and open-mindedness with each other. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, folks, you'll be glad to know we've only got a few minutes left, but we will take a few questions and we won't go through the whole panel, but we'll just pick and choose. So we'll go around for another few questions and then we'll come back to the panel, okay? Right, this lady and then Richard. Anybody else? And that lady. Anyone else? Right, so 3 questions. Okay, there you go. Okay.
The group I run, React, I'm actually along with some BEMA organisations and other organisations. We're actually working on doing workshops around that subject to basically go around to camps in Cali, Greece, various other places, as well as bringing in here all the refugees, because I'm aware that there is some cultural issues, and it's very much about education. So this is something that I'm very passionate about, and it's something I am working on.
Okay, thank you. Richard?
Yeah, I'm going to give the panel one more chance, and please remember my question this time. Would the panel, if in Parliament, would you press the Scottish Government to recommend against any legal action taken against universities or other public bodies because they refuse to comply with the racist prevent policy? Yes or no to that question, please.
Okay, thank you. That lady there?
Just very briefly. We do have a very right-wing media in this country, and I'm just wondering, from any party which is coming, have you ever witnessed any of your candidates trying to political point score by calling people racist, as you just did? And what do you think about that? Because you did actually call me a racist, and I think that's the kind of political correctness that we should worry about.
She didn't call you a racist.
She said. She implied that I said everyone.
No, okay,
she did. Yes, she did.
Okay.
You have to listen carefully.
Right.
I'm listening to her. You misheard her.
Oh, well, she's listening to you.
Right. First of all, can I just, about Richard's point about prevent, whether if it was taken to court for a university or a school who weren't prepared to implement prevent, would you support that? Would any party support that here?
Frankly, I think it's too hypothetical a situation for me to be able to commit to here now, because
students are an occupation in the university at the moment against.
No, I appreciate that. You're asking for individual. I don't know whether you're asking for us as individuals, whether we as individuals would stand, or whether what our party's stance is in relation to this.
I think my question was clear.
Well,
yes, we would support the stance.
Okay, solidarity with support. Any other takers?
Yes, we would also support it. I would also support it.
Okay.
Yes, I would also.
Okay, the Greens. Anyone else?
Certainly, my husband works at the university. He's a lecturer at the university. The course that he does, landscape architecture, they have a lot of people from overseas, including Muslims, and I would be very much standing up against anything where there was any pressure on behaving in a racist way to any community.
Could I just introduce a note of reality? The record of the Scottish Parliament in doing what you're asking is miserable. It's miserable. It's very, very rarely been done in the past. You know what comes to mind? Rendition flights, remember? Very similar. Oh, we'll do this, it's in a disgrace. Your people being rendered from here, there and the other via Prestwick Airport, Glasgow Airport, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Stornoway, you name it, we'll do it, right? When it came to it, they did squat diddly. And I think Rise is entitled to say to you, Richard, as the Scottish Socialist Party can put our record, this is about action, not talk. And Rise's action and the left's action in this is incomparable. There's nobody stood up in the Scottish Parliament. I'll bring you the news. The 6 Scottish Socialist Party MSPs, remember, we carry the badge of honour, that's how I'll put it. We were expelled from the Scottish Parliament for a month and fined £30,000. It's the most severe punishment, and Cameron the Tory can probably go back hundreds of years in parliamentary history and endorse this statement. It's the most severe punishment meted out to any parliamentarians in the history of British Parliament since Cromwell's time. And what was our great crime? We stood up and interrupted First Minister's questions with a piece of white paper like this, demanding Scotland's right to protest at Gleneagles when the G8 came here. So you must make up your mind, whether it's talk, or whether it's action, or whether you can trust people. And I have to say, the left's record in confronting the British establishment, whether it's at war, or conducting rendition flights, or behaviour like this, does not bear comparison with the rest of these people. It's far, far better, and I ask you to bear that in mind on the 5th of May.
Okay, I'm not going to take any more questions.
You answered my question.
If you be patient, okay? Right, before I go on, I just want to advertise an event that Scotland Against Criminalising Communities is holding. It's called Prevent Equals Racist and Islamophobic. It's on the 30th of April, 5 to 7 p.m. in this church here, okay? So, Prevent Equals Racist and Islamophobic. How will the anti-terrorism policy affect you? 30th of April, Saturday, 5 to 7 p.m. over here. Okay, now the panel, we're running out of time. The panel has heard a lot of questions, so I'm going to give them an opportunity to summarise them or to say, you know, why we should basically vote for them if they want to have a soundbite for 60 seconds. So, Alison, do you want to kick off?
I would just say, if we were talking about human rights, you know, I would go back to that human...
That's fine. Just carry on.
That's okay. I would go back to that Human Rights Act. That, you know, Scotland, we are about embracing people, and as an SNP, we really want to welcome people here. We're about diversity, and we're about supporting all of our people. So the things that I mentioned earlier, and I don't want to go through that list again, but about the social justice, empowering us all through a growth agenda, because that's what we are. We're all equal, and it's about creating a society for all. The reason I'm standing is because I believe that no matter what your bank balance is or whatever, surely we're all about just creating policies that we can grow us all and create opportunities for us all.
Thank you very much. Alex?
May the 5th we all have a decision. It's an important decision for our future government. We want the best government. Now, we have 50% of all our income, of all our GDP is spent on the state. 50% is from economy. That's a dangerous situation to be in. So if in 2008 we had a recession. Recessions come every 5, 8, 10 years, and we don't know when that next recession is coming. When that next recession starts coming, it's going to affect everything. And if we have an economy that is dependent on the state with a centralist government, we will be in not a good position. The only party that is standing for less government, for decentralisation, for empowering local communities, is called localism, is the Conservative Party. The only party that is standing up for the union against independence is the Conservative Party. The only party, talking about justice, if it's named person policy, we haven't talked about that. The only party that abstained from the named policy law when it came out was the Conservative Party. That's why, if you want the right government, even though he's walking away, if you want the right government, choose Conservative, vote in your regional vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kevin.
It's no secret that Solidarity is a pro-independence party, and one of our policies is to go for Indy 2018. We believe that, you know, to get out of the mire that we're in, that we have to go for independence as soon as. We feel that there's people who in the communities that can't wait a generation, they can't wait 10 years. These are people, there's 300,000 people now attending food banks in Scotland. There's 1 in 4 children that are living in poverty in Edinburgh alone. In Edinburgh, it's a total disgrace. We feel that we're asking the Yes family, you know, rather to vote SNP 1 and 2. That if you want to let the wolf back in the back door, then if you do support SNP 1 and 2, then you're leaving the back door open for the pro-unionist parties to once again come in and into government, well, into Parliament. So what we are saying is, if it's not ourselves, we go for another pro-independence party and fill the Scottish Parliament with pro-independence candidates.
Thank you very much. Kate.
Thank you. Well, first I'd like to say thank you very much for inviting the Women's Equality Party to be here. This is the first election that we've ever challenged since our inception, so it's really exciting to be part of that political movement. And honestly, I can't imagine a better place to do it than Scotland. I think that we're living now in a time that history is going to call unique when it looks back. And I think if there's one thing to come out of tonight, it's that there is a lot of agreement on the issues that go to the root of our society. And it's now time for us to come together and work together to make the changes that will build a country that we'll be proud to pass on to our children. The Women's Equality Party intends to be a collaborative, cooperative force in Scottish politics, bringing parties together to make sure that we're always keeping equality on the agenda. So we're asking that on May 5th you give your second vote to the Women's Equality Party to help us build that fair, just and equal Scotland that all of us can live in.
Thank you very much. Lorna from the Green Party.
There have been Scottish Greens in the Scottish Parliament since the beginning, a continuous representation from the Scottish Green Party. We have been a strong voice for what we believe in. We have a clear track record of standing up for what we believe in. We have pledged in our manifesto, and you can read it at greens.scot, that's where all the information is, 6 key pledges. We've chosen these carefully. There are things that we believe that we can achieve by pushing the Scottish Government to be bolder, to use the powers that they have. So we want your list to vote. That's on the peach ballot paper. If you support the pillars of the Green Movement, which are peace, equality, sustainability, and radical local democracy. That was a bit of a weird one. In terms of equality, racial equality, gender equality, and economic equality are all on our agenda. So I highly recommend that you read a bit more about that online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colin from Rise.
Thank you. Zahid, could I say that Rise's message cannot be clearer? We're asking for your second vote to send experienced socialists to the Scottish Parliament, because it's going to be vital in this new Parliament to have Rise MSPs at Holyrood, pressurising the SNP government from the left. For goodness knows they've shown how susceptible they are to pressure from the right. I'm top of the Rise list in the Lothians, and I believe I'm entitled, on the basis of my record as an MSP and outside the Parliament, to ask for your second vote on the 5th of May. And finally, I'd like to say to the viewers online, as well as our live audience here at Augustins, Rise is having an election rally tomorrow night at the Radisson Blue Hotel. Radisson Blue Hotel. Come along here, Tariq Ali, myself and Cat Boyd, 7 o'clock. Hope to see you there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Cat from the Labour Party.
I think probably everyone in this room, and I include myself in that, is that Scottish Labour had a lot to learn over the last couple of decades of mistakes that were made, arrogance and complacency being among them. Scottish Labour has changed. Scottish Labour is learning. And we want to use the powers that are coming to the Scottish Parliament in order to make real change. This is the boldest, most pragmatic and progressive agenda that Scottish Labour has ever stood on. After 9 years of an SNP government where things have not been getting done and they will talk left and act right, they represent the status quo in this election. There is change on offer, and it's on offer from the Scottish Labour Party. Let's use the powers to make a real difference, and we can do that by voting both votes Labour on May the 5th. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jackie?
Yes, very much that the Liberal Democrats suffered a bit of a hammering at the 2011 Scottish election. We went down from 16 to 5. But those 5 have been working very hard, punching above their weight. I'd like to give particular credit to Alison McInnes, who has been our Justice spokesperson. She was very much on the Justice Committee, speaking out against the court closures by the SNP, speaking out against the offensive behaviour at Football Act, speaking out against the centralisation, the mess that has become Police Scotland. That's thinking of the past. We'd like to have more Lib Dems in Holyrood after next week. And one of the things we want to do, we've been touching on it tonight, is about inequality. That's why the Liberal Democrats would like to use the power that the Scottish Parliament has to raise tax by 1 pence for all tax bands. That is specifically for education. Education at all levels, from early years education, and it's recognised that supporting youngsters in the earliest days of life, that if they're not getting that support, then the inequality in later life starts right as soon as a youngster is born, and so we need to be tackling that. We also want in schools £1,400 for primary schools, 900 for secondary schools. That's for a pupil premium, so that head teachers can be able to decide how they might use it. For example, it might be to support children with special needs, having classroom assistants. The pupil premium works in England. I was actually part of the working party that devised it, and I have seen it working to help inequality in schools. And we also want to invest in colleges. Not everybody wants to go to university, but we've seen college places cut, something like 150,000 college places have gone. Again, centralisation of colleges. And so we're wanting to be investing in colleges so that youngsters who don't want to go to university have opportunities to learn vocational skills.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to thank Scotland Against Criminalising Communities for organising this event, and it would be really helpful that on your way out if you could make a small contribution to them. I'd like to thank the panel for taking the time to be with us, and of course you, the audience, for asking the questions. Thank you very much and good night.
Hello viewers, sorry about the transmission this evening. Unfortunately there's a new room to be in and the Wi-Fi transmission was not adequate, so I'm trying to do my best on the phone. Anyway, but here from this Hustings event, I shall say goodbye. Cheery bye. Let's cut.